On the 19th of October, it was the 30th anniversary of the first meeting of what was eventually to become First Norm UK, and it later became 15 Square. The first meeting was organised by John Warren, our founder, after he had read a review of a book written by Jim Bigelow called The Joy of Uncircumcising. And despite its intriguing title, this was an academic publication exploring the consequences and issues associated with circumcision, along with men's stories. John felt that there was a need for an organisation in the UK to tackle this issue. The meeting was held in London and 19 men met to discuss their issues with circumcision. And up to that point, circumcision had been a subject that men were not allowed to talk about. And this was the first time that the men in that room had spoken to anyone about their situation. I was at that first meeting, never thinking I would be standing here today as chief officer of the charity and a social leper at dinner parties. I want to take you through a brief history of events over the last 30 years. 1994 was the year that Nelson Mandela became president of South Africa and the Channel Tunnel opened. Tony Blair was leader of the opposition. Fashion trends included faux fur and platform shoes. I couldn't find any. I was tempted to wear them today. It's interesting to remember that 1994 was a momentous year for the tech industry. It was the year the World Wide Web was born, otherwise known as the Internet, as we know it today. There were no smartphones, no iPads, no flat-screen TVs. And imagine this, no Google, no Netflix, no Dropbox. I'll be talking later about the difference the internet has made to our charity and the visibility of our issue. After that first meeting, we struggled to get publicity. And when we did, there was always a medic to say that this was not a problem. In fact, the first time we managed to get some publicity on a Radio 4 programme, a urologist stated that if men started to restore their foreskins, it would be pandering to a lot of potentially inadequate people. Such was the attitude of the medical profession at that time, and to a certain extent still today. Shortly after this, and following some publicity, John was invited to be interviewed on BBC Newsnight. In those days, every time we were interviewed, there was always a doctor or a rabbi interviewed for balance. And in this case, Jeremy Paxman was the interviewer, and I was astonished at his knowledge of the subject. He asked John all the right questions, and then turning to the rabbi sitting next to John, gave him a really hard time. I think I remember him saying, "Right, Rabbi, we're talking about genital mutilation here. What do you have to say to that?" And the rabbi was going further down in his seat. I will mention Jeremy Paxman later because he's quite an interesting character. Some men blame their doctors, but it's difficult to have a rant at an unknown medic who did the deed several years ago. In 1996, a group of 20 Norm UK members decided to put the blame in this direction, and they started the ball rolling by putting their names to a letter in the British Medical Journal. The letter began, "Dear editor, we are all adult men who believe that we have been harmed by circumcision carried out in childhood by doctors in Britain. We are concerned about the ethics of the surgery on children and that it is commonly carried out when it is not necessary." The letter was published in the British Medical Journal on the 10th of February 1996, and that morning the phone went mad as members of the press called for interviews. Unfortunately, the IRA chose that day to plant a bomb in Canary Wharf. I'm just glad they didn't plant the bomb at the British Medical Association headquarters, otherwise we might have had some serious questions to answer. The first intensive exploration of the unrecognised psychological and social aspects of circumcision was undertaken by Ronald Goldman, a psychologist from the USA. He published a book in 1997 entitled Circumcision, the Hidden Trauma, How an American Cultural Practice Affects Infants. The book had been endorsed by dozens of professionals in psychology, psychiatry, child development, paediatrics, obstetrics, childbirth, education, sociology and anthropology. That really started a ball rolling on the psychological damage caused by circumcision, and we hope going forward to keep this ball rolling. The following year, Dr. Janet Menage from the UK did some groundbreaking work on this with some of our service users, and her research is detailed on our website, and I think it will be useful to quote from her article. Janet began her article by saying, "Circumcision is a euphemism for genital reduction surgery or genital mutilation performed by medically licensed or unqualified practitioners for various reasons." She says that it is important to define it literally, honestly rather, for that is how the mind interprets it, with or without superimposed denials, explanations, intellectualizations. She goes on to say that circumcisions are performed on children who by definition are not able to give informed consent of the kind available to adults. They are vulnerable to coercion and manipulation, and generally have little say in what happens to their bodies medically and surgically. They're not usually allowed to say no to medical procedures because it is deemed that parents and doctors know best. But it is unlikely that any child, asked if they would like a person with a knife to cut off part of their penis, would agree to such an action. That would be a normal psychological reaction to the threat of attack and is overruled at some psychological cost. How true that is. In 1998, we applied to become a charity. This caused an issue with the Charity Commission because they received an objection from a member of the public claiming we were racist. The Charity Commission conducted an investigation and they told us afterwards that they were satisfied that we were not racist and granted us charitable status. They did put us on probation for a year, but that was a great step forward. 1998 was the year that Peter Ball gave us our first soundbite when he said on a live interview that the foreskin was not something that could be amputated willy-nilly. That, although accidental, that soundbite gave us more publicity when it was mentioned on Radio 4 News Quiz a few months later. And strangely enough, the guy who mentioned it was John Prescott, who has died this week. I was once asked in an interview if there were any drawbacks to foreskin restoration. I said that's why men did it. These soundbites can come another way, actually, because I was once introduced at a meeting as Mr. Alcott from 15 Square, much to the amusement of everybody in the room, but everybody's remembered me there since. And that is true. In 1999, we launched a national survey looking into circumcision rates and practices throughout the UK. Bear in mind this is 1999. Our findings suggested that up to 91% of these operations were unnecessary. The results also suggested that circumcision occurred throughout the country in greater numbers than medically necessary, with very little regulation and without laboratory confirmation that diagnosis and surgery were appropriate. John Warren said, "I find these results startling. Here we have a significant operation that has lifelong effects which could be almost totally avoided. Britain clearly overperforms circumcisions. More worryingly, there appears to be little or no monitoring of the procedure. That is something we've been trying to address ever since." Since then, we've conducted a number of freedom of information exercises with similar results. In one hospital in Birmingham, in 1 year, 11 boys were admitted to intensive care with life-threatening injuries following circumcision. I mentioned Jeremy Paxman earlier, and in 2006 he was invited to present Man's Hour on Radio 4. And I'm going to read a report from the Sunday Times at that time. Jeremy Paxman, Man's Hour, the unkindest cut of all. Jeremy Paxman wanted to talk about men's bits, but Auntie wielded the knife. Woman's Hour hits Paxo where it hurts. And it says, "The life of everyday public figures is full of surprises, but it was nonetheless surprising to hear about Jeremy Paxman's interest in male circumcision. He was to be in the hot seat at Broadcasting House after the Woman's Hour unit had come up with the wild and zany idea of putting on a Man's Hour programme over the holiday period. Asked what male-centric issues he would like to discuss, Paxo opted for the issue of foreskin abuse. It proved to be a problem. Although Woman's Hour has reported on female circumcision in the past, this male version was thought to be inappropriate for broadcasting at a time when children might be tuned in. Paxman held his ground and was told that his services were no longer required. In a diary for the house magazine for the huffy middle-aged The Spectator, he complained, while in the usual way protesting their liberal credentials, they were worried about making it relevant and interesting to the audience. These were tricky, sensitive issues. It may well be that the bigwigs of Women's Hour were right to spare Radio 4 listeners the upsetting image of Paxman moving curiously among the danglers, tapers, cone wielders, and self-restorers. But the row surrounding the decision reflects more than questions of squeamishness and taste. When the women decided the contest and character of Man's Hour opted for Jon Snow as presenter, and when subsequently Paxman went public with the story, they were pointing up a subtle sea change in the area of masculinity. Until recently, contemporary males were presented through the media as belonging in one of two categories. They tended to be either traditionalists, backward-looking types, which clung to the stereotypical views on matters of gender and much else, or they were new lads, a group which confusingly contained both the blokishness represented in a programme like They Think It's All Over and the sensitivity of a Nick Hornby novel. A dated reference, however, gender stereotypes of oversensitive men or traditional blokes still exist, and I'll leave you all to work out which group you belong to. Since then, we've downplayed comments about restoration as they tend to distract from our core message about the damage and leave us open to ridicule. I think we also need to be selective in using the term uncircumcised to describe the normal penis. It's not uncircumcised, it's a normal penis. There is a difference between our approach and protest. The work that 15 Square does is not activism focused. We're not anti-circumcision, we are pro-informed consent. This is part of our organisation's ethos of being proactive rather than reactive. In 2011, we started our collaboration with Keele University and the Keele Medical Student Placement Programme. And I'm pleased that two members are in the audience today. We have Sharon and Daveen from Keele. Later that same year, the British Medical Association held their annual representatives meeting in Cardiff. A motion was put forward by Dr. Anthony Lempert encouraging them to debate the issue of circumcision. Along with several of our colleagues, I went to Cardiff to speak to the doctors attending to try to persuade them to vote for the motion. I was astonished at the rudeness of some of the attendees. One doctor told me angrily that he'd done hundreds of circumcision and intended to do hundreds more. I was tempted to say that when they circumcised him, they threw the wrong bit away, but I resisted the temptation. Anthony is with us today, and he will be talking later about his battles with the GMC and the BMA. In that same year, and after 6 years of requesting, we managed to get an hour-long meeting with the General Medical Council Ethics Committee. During that meeting, it was agreed that we provided the evidence to prove that they are not up to date with training and that there was a need to get a professional body to produce a leaflet. We stated that complaints were not taken seriously, and it was agreed that we would produce a document with some statistical information. Finally, it was suggested that there was a need for formal registration of the procedure to record who was circumcised, when, where, how, and by whom. John Warren asked that adequate records needed to be kept and audits carried out. All present agreed this was essential. I sent them the statistical information they requested and asked for updates. All my emails were ignored and they refused to request for further meetings. 6 months later, I submitted a Freedom of Information request asking to see copies of their internal correspondence following our meeting. There was none. In 2017, a national survey of male circumcision incidents and harms was undertaken by a member of the public using the Freedom of Information Act. The survey reveals a disturbing gap between circumcision reality and rhetoric. Child circumcision harm is widespread, and serious harm may particularly affect those assumed to be the safest target, infants. Yet from thousands of A&E and GP follow-ups to hundreds of revision surgeries to the deaths, 4 to 5 recorded as linked to circumcision in 65 months, these impacts are going unreported. The lucrative private circumcision sector is minimally regulated and evidences some dangerous and dishonest practices. Even some NHS mass circumcision schemes, which headline quality assurance, fail to enforce service level agreements and breach guidelines on consent. Long-term monitoring of male circumcision impact is absent, and there is no evidence of due diligence into the risk of future litigation or even the cost to the NHS of future treatments for urinary, psychological or sexual issues. Meanwhile, therapeutically coded child circumcision is still significantly over-referred, bringing unnecessary costs in terms of both surgeries and treatment of complications. The health of children may not be traded for an illusion of cultural sensitivity, nor to maintain a belief in medical infallibility. With non-therapeutic or dubiously therapeutic circumcision affecting around 40,000 boys each year, it is time for a comprehensive national audit into the incidence and impact on the surgery. Only then can a full national debate begin. 30 years ago, John Warren compared circumcision to an ocean liner. It's impossible to stop an ocean liner in a mile. It has to slow to a halt. I think we spent enough time trying to slow down this particular liner. We need to sink it. I think the time is right to create a virtual iceberg to put in the path of the General Medical Council and the British Medical Association liners, and as a relative of the captain of the Titanic, I know how effective icebergs can be at stopping even unsinkable ships. Turning away from the medical profession. Prior to the pandemic, we were featured in a number of radio and TV programmes, including BBC Inside Out and A Cut Too Far, which was broadcast on BBC One. That was actually filmed in stone. I said earlier that I will be talking about the difference the internet has made to our issue, and this was particularly evident at the start of the pandemic. Keele University, again, and Santander were our saviours. They introduced a virtual intern scheme where charities could apply for a virtual intern for 100 hours at no cost, and Santander would pay the intern. We applied for the scheme and were lucky to get 3 interns. One analysed 8 years of our inquiries and generated some amazing statistics. Another helped us on psychological damage, and our 3rd intern, Louise, did such a good job revolutionising our marketing that she's still with us. Shortly after the pandemic, she emigrated to Australia, so she's now dealing with the down under. In 2023, a supplement to the abridged manuscript published by the International Journal of Impotence Research, entitled Foreskin Restorers: Insights into Motivations, Successes, Challenges and Experiences with Medical and Mental Health Professionals, contains some interesting survey statistics. Of those surveyed, only 13% of respondents had sought help from a medical or mental health professional. 50% who sought no help believed that professionals would not be knowledgeable or supportive. Of those who sought help, 25% reported the professional was unsympathetic, dismissive or ridiculing. 69% believed that professionals are insufficiently aware of or compassionate towards circumcision sufferers. 64% believe that professionals are unaware of foreskin anatomy or circumcision harms. 85% believe that medical and mental health professionals should receive special training on circumcision distress and foreskin restoration. That's something that I think that we'll be going forward with shortly. 87% would recommend foreskin restoration. For those of you who don't know, foreskin restoration is a non-surgical procedure using skin stretching techniques. It's a lengthy process, however, it can never replace the nerve endings contained in the original foreskin. And over 60 birth countries were represented in that survey. Apart from helping circumcised men, we have a lot of inquiries from intact men with tight foreskins. They come to us because doctors often only advise circumcision, which they don't want. They search online and they come to us. Dr. Peter Ball, our Vice Chairman, has answered numerous inquiries. It goes into thousands, doesn't it, Peter? Unfortunately, they rarely give us feedback or donations, so it's very difficult to maintain this service. We do have publications we send inquirers detailing the steps they can take themselves to solve their problem without resorting to circumcision. And as more and more men are being left intact in this country, there are obviously more and more problems with men when they have problems with their foreskin that are not being dealt with properly. As I said earlier, our biggest obstacle is our subject matter. Compared to our start in 1995, when nobody would give us publicity, things have at least changed in this respect. However, it's still a difficult and personal subject for men to open up about, and even more difficult to get organisational support. And as a charity dealing with this issue, we're aware that there is a difference between the men who recognise that they've been damaged. How they manifest it can be enlightening. Many seem to fall into two categories, which I think could be described as introverts or extroverts. The introverts often become loners. They hide their feelings, they would certainly not discuss them. They're ashamed of their damage and they will often not enter into relationships, and they will not use changing rooms, anything to avoid anyone seeing their damage. These are the people who are extremely difficult for us to help, simply because they won't go public in any way. The introverts are more likely to view our website than to contact us in person. Now, the extroverts often react with anger, and they sometimes lash out at members of the medical profession, and who can blame them when nobody seems to be listening? Many of the men seeking online groups, either through forums such as Reddit, which currently has 6,000 followers on their circumcision grief forum. Others prefer Discord services. These are sometimes more militant than the public-facing forums. The appeal of these forums and the internet spaces is the anonymity provided and the sense of recognition. In public online spaces such as Twitter or X, these men are often targeted by trolls who further ridicule them. Now, we do have a Discord server, and I would encourage you all to sign up for it. Jason put this into practice, and there are very strict guidelines. You have to be a member to take part, to belong to it, to Discord, and behaviours are monitored. So if there's any unruly behaviour, they are dismissed, basically. At every committee meeting, Louise gives a report on the activity on our social media posts. Here are some details from her most recent report. Key metrics for November 23 to November 24. Website traffic. Active users 41,000. Geographical data. Top countries by active users. The United States, which is obviously a circumcising country, 17,000. The United Kingdom, 5,600. Canada, 3,200. India, 2,400, and Australia 1,800. The audience split into circumcised men and 15 square, it's 11,267, and intact men 8,198 views. So as you will see from this presentation, it's obvious that a vast number of people know about us, but they don't contact us. In order to help and support these men further, we need to encourage them to become members, or at the very least, reach out to 15 Square. This helps us to continue our work and develop services. This is a graph of our current members. You will see this is our membership over the years. So there was a spike when we had our first publicity. That was after the Jeremy Paxman programme, and it sort of went up and down, and then there was a total dip when we didn't have a website for a while, and we had very little people helping. But then when Louise came, and you see from the pandemic, when I had a virtual intern, it started on the way up. And you can see the dip in this last 12 months is the dip because we've been engaged in other things planning, so I haven't had as much time to to do outreach, and with Jason's MBA Orology, as we refer to it, that's had an impact. So hopefully they will start to climb again. We need to get people to join or support us if we are to progress. There are many organisations helping men deal with mental health issues. One shining example is Andy's Man Club, and that was formed by a mother and brother of Andy who took his own life. This is a men's suicide prevention charity offering free to attend peer support groups across the United Kingdom and online. They say that they want to end the stigma surrounding men's mental health and help men through the power of conversation. They do this through weekly, free-to-attend peer support groups for men over 18. This charity was formed in 2016 and now has groups at over 150 locations across 3 countries of the UK, with 4,000 men using their services. I'm aware of at least 5 suicides relating to our issue. Our issue is no less important than any other, and we need to work to get that same recognition. We are recognised for our efforts worldwide. With more support and funding, we could do so much more. Thank you.